As a front-end web developer, we will be spending the majority of our time building for the client side of the landscape. This primarily means HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that will be parsed and executed by the browser. So when we hear the term client side, what exactly is that referring to? Well, it typically starts with the end user's browser that they are using to consume web pages. The client side is made up of a series of events and experiences that occur within the browser when it sends off a request for some content and what it does with that response it receives. The things we need to understand when it comes to the landscape of the client side are the different ways website code is built and delivered to the client. From server-side generated to static site files and packaged up web code delivered to mobile devices, it is important that we are familiar with options. When we build for the client side, we are building the instructions for the browser that tells it how to render content and provide it with the code that tells it how to handle events. The client side will ask the server side for some content or let it know it should do some action, and then typically it will receive some response. And that is about the extent of its knowledge of the server side. While the client and server side work together to make up a website or web application, they are viewed as separate pieces to the puzzle. Now, there is some overlap. The code for the client side, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, need to get delivered to the client. And sometimes this code needs to be dynamically constructed based on the request settings for it. So, it is common to have server-side code that constructs front-end or client-side code. Yet, it is also becoming common to have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript constructed without a server-side language and just served up as resources from a web server. This type of client-side architecture involves using JavaScript to communicate with APIs to pull and push data. This separation of concerns and decoupling of the client side from the server side opens up the opportunity for client-side code to be bundled up and make its way into native apps, both on mobile and tablet devices. These recent expansions of new architecture have also provided a growth and potential for web developers to focus and specialize as front-end web developers. Whereas before, one used to have to know the full stack to work in web development, now there are jobs and career paths open to us that just pertain to the client side. Ultimately, as front-end web developers, we will have a weighted interest in mastering the client-side domain. We already have a starting foundation on the front-end languages, so we want to round out our front-end knowledge by learning about how web requests are made from a client application, how the client side deals with responses from the server side, what happens during a request, and really understanding and becoming intimate with the different browsers and the role they play to render content and execute interactions. Learning paths for all of these will be discussed in the upcoming clips in this module. So areas of focus for further learning on the client-side topic include knowing server-side rendering, knowing about static site files, and knowing about bundling web apps for mobile. In the next clip, we will discuss the server side of things and identify what we need to know about that part of the landscape, including web servers and server hosts.